Part 1: The Wallet in the Rain. Rain pelted downtown Chicago like it had something to prove, streaking down the sides of buildings and turning sidewalks into veins of reflected neon and grit. A cold March wind came screaming around corners, knifing through layers of cheap coats and soaked shoes, and the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from people hurrying past the things they don't want to see. Daniel Price sat against a wall beneath a rusting scaffolding just off Wabash and 14th, wrapped in a U.S. Army jacket that had long since given up pretending it could keep out the cold. The sleeves were frayed, the patch on the shoulder faded. His breath came out in short, white bursts, his gloved hands shaking more from memory than cold. Around him, the city moved on fast, important, indifferent. He didn't blame it anymore. He'd stopped taking it personally. A cold routine. Mornings were always the hardest. That thin stretch between night's forgotten shadows and the brightness of commuters and sirens. You couldn't beg in the morning, people were tired, rushed, too close to their own deadlines to see yours. Instead, Daniel stayed hidden. Not because he had something to hide, but because people didn't like being reminded. He dug through his old backpack, a torn and faded thing with one working zipper and a patch sewn on from an old Cubs cap. Inside, he hoped, was half of a protein bar he'd saved from the church kitchen 2 nights back. Instead, his fingers brushed something hard. Square. Leather. He pulled it out. A wallet. Sleek. Black. Wet, but not destroyed. It took him a full 5 seconds to realize what he was holding. Not his. Daniel glanced around. The alley was empty. The sidewalk just beyond the scaffolding showed no one in sight. He opened the wallet cautiously, like it might accuse him. Inside, $240 in crisp 20s. A platinum Amex. A folded photo of a boy and a golden retriever sitting on a dock. A business card. Ethan Callahan, Managing Director, Glasswell Capital. Direct number, embossed. Daniel froze. He stared at the money. At the card. At the smiling boy and that dumb, happy dog. The kind of life Daniel remembered like a dream that had gotten too far away to wake back into. The line you don't cross. He could take the money. No one would know. $240 meant dry socks. Meant a week of motels if he played it right. Meant no more rummaging through bins behind the Chinese takeout place that dumped leftovers after midnight. But Daniel had learned something on the street: you can lose everything and still keep your name. He didn't drink anymore. Didn't steal. Didn't lie when it mattered. Some part of him, battered but still there, still believed in the line. And this wallet didn't belong to him. Flashback, a life before. He remembered the last wallet he'd owned. Brown leather, cracked on the corners. Inside, a photo of his daughter, Mia, when she was 3 ribbons in her hair, frosting on her face. That wallet had been stolen the night he slept in a men's shelter after getting laid off. A man named Travis had taken it. Daniel had punched him. He still didn't know if he regretted it. But he'd never forgotten what it felt like when the last thing that tethered him to his old life vanished in someone else's hand. He wouldn't be Travis. The call. He walked 4 blocks, head down, until he found the corner bodega with the flickering fluorescent sign. Inside, the warmth was immediate and smelled like cumin and old wood. The girl behind the counter, maybe 20, glanced at him but didn't flinch. Her eyes were tired but kind. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Could I borrow your phone? It's important. I won't touch anything else." She hesitated. Then nodded. He dialed the number on the card with trembling fingers. It rang once. Twice. Then, Callahan. "Mr. Callahan," Daniel said, voice rough. "I think I have something of yours. Breakfast with the rich." He told Ethan where to find him, then walked back to the scaffolding and waited in the rain. 43 minutes later, a black BMW pulled up across the street. A tall man in a charcoal trenchcoat stepped out, shielding himself with a sleek umbrella. "Daniel," the man called. Daniel stood slowly. Ethan crossed the street and stopped short when he saw him. "You found my wallet?" Daniel nodded and handed it over without a word. Ethan opened it quickly, counted the money, looked at the card. "You didn't take anything." Daniel shrugged. "Wasn't mine." Ethan studied him for a long second. Most people would have offered cash. A reward. A pat on the back and a car ride back to nowhere. Instead, Ethan said, "Have you eaten?" Daniel blinked. "Not today." Ethan tilted his head. "Come with me." The first real meal. They walked 2 blocks to a diner called Penelope's Real Eggs, hot coffee, real cream. The waitress didn't blink at Daniel's coat or his smell. Maybe Ethan tipped well. Maybe she'd seen worse. Daniel ate slow, carefully, like someone who didn't want to wake up from it too soon. Ethan didn't talk much at first. He just watched. When Daniel finally sat back, Ethan leaned in. "You used to be someone." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Don't take it wrong," Ethan added. "I mean, someone who had a place. I was a foreman at a furniture plant. Then they moved it overseas. Got sick. Lost the house. That was 10 years ago." "Family?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Used to. Not anymore." "An unspoken offer." Ethan nodded. He pulled out a $100 bill and slid it across the table. Daniel stared at it. Then pushed it back. "I didn't return the wallet for a reward," he said. "I know," Ethan replied. "But take it anyway. Not for what you did. For what you still have." Daniel hesitated. Took it. Not for the money, but for what it meant. That someone saw him. The follow-up. The next morning, Daniel found a voicemail on the phone the shelter let him use for emergencies. It was Ethan. "I've been thinking. You said you used to work numbers, manage people. I've got an old outreach program I've ignored too long. Needs fixing. If you're up for a conversation, come see me." He left the address. Floor 19. Glasswell Capital. Daniel stared at the phone, heart pounding. He could pretend he didn't hear it. He could go back to the scaffolding. Or he could take a step. He could risk being seen again. Part 2, Breakfast Like a Stranger. The next morning began with fog clinging low over the streets of Chicago, a damp grayness that crept into everything. Daniel Price stood on the edge of decision, one foot in the shelter's linoleum-floored hallway, the other pointed toward the world that had long since stopped feeling like his. In his coat pocket, the crisp $100 bill Ethan Callahan had handed him the day before felt heavier than it should have. Daniel had not yet spent it. Part of him feared it would vanish the moment he tried to use it. Part of him was not sure he had earned it. But it was the voicemail that kept playing in his mind. "I have an old outreach program. It needs fixing. Come see me. Glasswell Capital. Floor 19. Daniel did not know if it was a job offer, a test, or a moment of kindness Ethan would forget the second his office door closed. But still, Daniel found himself walking north, each step soaking through the soles of his torn boots, each block a challenge not to turn around. Walking into glass. When he reached the gleaming glass tower where Glasswell Capital sat, he almost did not go in. The building rose like something out of another life, steel ribs, glass veins, polished floors so clean they reflected your doubts back at you. The security guard at the front desk looked up as Daniel approached, eyes lingering on the frayed cuffs of Daniel's jacket and the dirt beneath his fingernails. "I am here to see Ethan Callahan," Daniel said, voice steady despite the thunder behind his ribs. "Name?" "Daniel Price. He left me a message." The guard checked a list, then picked up the phone. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Take the elevator to the 19th floor." Daniel stepped into the mirrored elevator, his reflection a stranger in a war coat. The ride up was too fast, too quiet. When the doors slid open, a receptionist smiled politely. "Mr. Callahan is expecting you." Unlikely offer. Ethan's office overlooked the river, wide windows swallowing the city in soft gray light. He stood as Daniel entered, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled in a way that made him look both professional and human. "I am glad you came," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." Daniel did, knees stiff from sleeping upright against brick walls. "I meant what I said," Ethan continued. 10 years ago, I funded a small outreach program meant to train and reintroduce long-term unemployed folks into the workforce. It never worked the way I wanted. Too many layers. Too many people with their own agenda. "And you want me to do what?" Daniel asked. "I want someone who knows what it feels like. Who has lived it. I want your help rebuilding it." Daniel blinked. "You are offering me a job?" "I am offering you a paid contract," Ethan said. "Part-time. Consultant level for now. You would come in twice a week. Talk to my team. Help us understand what actually works." Daniel sat back, stunned. "You do not even know me." "I know you returned that wallet when no one was looking," Ethan said. "And you refused my money. That is the kind of honesty I do not find in people paid 6 figures to smile on cue." Daniel looked down at his hands. "You have no idea how far gone I was." "I do not care where you have been," Ethan replied. "I care where you are willing to go." The meal that changed everything. Daniel left the office with a handwritten appointment for the following Tuesday and a voucher for a clothing nonprofit Ethan worked with. He stared at the card in his hand like it might vanish in the wind. His stomach growled, sharp and sudden. For a moment, he considered going back to the shelter. The line would be forming by now. But then he looked down at the $100 bill still in his coat pocket. He exhaled slowly. One meal, he told himself. Just one. Not a feast. Not a celebration. A promise. He walked 3 blocks and stepped into a small diner called Molly's on Madison. No chrome, no hipster signs, just cracked booths and an old man pouring coffee like it was his religion. Daniel took a seat in the back. A waitress approached. "Morning, Han, what can I get you?" He looked at the menu. Then looked again. It felt like reading in another language. It had been years since he had ordered without worrying what came free. "I will take the," he paused. Cleared his throat. The hot breakfast plate. Eggs, sausage, toast. And coffee. "Please." The waitress smiled and scribbled it down. "Coming right up." He watched her walk away, then pressed his hand against the table to remind himself it was real. A meal to remember. The plate came hot and full. The eggs, fluffy and golden. The sausage browned at the edges. The toast buttered to the corners. Steam rose from the coffee in soft curls that smelled like morning. Daniel picked up his fork. Not with greed. Not with guilt. But with reverence. Each bite was a memory returning. Of Sunday breakfasts at the kitchen table. Of laughter echoing through rooms he used to own. Of hands held across a table, long before they let go. A bell over the door rang. Two men entered, laughing too loudly, dressed in layers of designer casual scarves, leather, watches that cost more than Daniel's old truck. He looked down at his plate. Focused. Then heard one of them say, "I dropped my wallet this morning." Must have been that homeless guy from the alley. Daniel's heart slowed. He glanced up. The man was blonde. Smug. Talking too fast. His friend asked, "You get it back?" "Yeah. Some old vet handed it in. Freaking miracle. Thought for sure I was going to have to cancel everything." The friend laughed. Bet he wanted a reward. Offered. He refused. Can you believe that? The friend paused. "So, what did you do?" The man shrugged. "Nothing. I mean," he said, "no. What was I supposed to do?" The waitress arrived with coffee for them. Daniel sat perfectly still, his fork resting against the edge of his plate. He had not expected thanks. But hearing it put like that, a shrug, a punchline, it sank deep. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the receipt for the clothes voucher. Stared at it for a long second. Then folded it carefully and tucked it away again. He would keep it. Not as a gift, but as a seed. The walk forward. When he left the diner, full for the first time in weeks, the rain had stopped. Puddles lined the sidewalk like mirrors. The sun struggled to burn through the clouds. Daniel walked slower now, not from pain, but because for once, there was somewhere to go, and he wanted to feel each step getting him there. He stopped by a store window and caught his reflection. Still worn. Still tired. But standing. Upright. And moving. Part 3, The Shoes That Fit. Daniel Price stood just outside the second-hand clothing nonprofit, staring through the smudged glass doors as if waiting for permission from someone only he could see. The building was quiet, a former bank turned community resource center. A laminated sign in the window read, "Dignity First." No questions asked. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and laundry soap. Fluorescent lights buzzed above racks of neatly organized coats, shirts, trousers, and shoes. It was warmer than he expected. A volunteer at a folding table looked up and offered a gentle smile. "Can I help you?" Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out the voucher Ethan had given him. It had creased where he had folded and unfolded it 10 times in his pocket. "I was told I could pick out some things," he said quietly. The volunteer nodded. She had a clipboard and the kind of voice that did not try to sound cheerful, it simply was. "Absolutely. Take your time. Try on whatever you like. The fitting rooms are just past the mirrors." He nodded. "Thank you." It had been years since someone invited him to choose anything. A man in a mirror. Daniel wandered among the racks, fingers grazing fabric like it might vanish. He looked at labels, ran his thumb along clean stitching. He paused at a dark gray jacket, heavier than his army coat, but not military. Civilian. Structured. He pulled it off the hanger and walked toward the mirrors. The man who looked back at him was not a stranger, exactly. But he was a version Daniel had not seen in years. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes set deeper than before. But when he slipped into the new jacket, he stood straighter. It did not make him someone else. It reminded him he was still someone. New shoes. The shoes were what nearly undid him. He had not worn shoes without holes in nearly 4 years. The volunteer brought out a few pairs, black, brown, soft soles and hard leather. But it was a pair of plain, brown lace-ups that stopped him cold. He slipped his foot into the right shoe and felt nothing. No cold. No damp. No ache from gravel pushing through. Just support. Warmth. A perfect, quiet fit. He tightened the laces. Stood. And something shifted. His feet no longer apologized for touching the ground. He belonged on it. A visitor from the past. As Daniel stepped out of the fitting room, jacket on, shoes tied, carrying a fresh shirt and a clean pair of trousers in a plastic garment bag, the front door opened behind him. He turned instinctively and froze. A man in a tan overcoat entered, brushing snow from his shoulders. He looked younger than Daniel remembered, but it was him. Matt Camden. Daniel's former supervisor at the old manufacturing plant. The man who had signed his final release form before the layoffs. The one who had not looked him in the eye. Matt's gaze met his now and faltered. Daniel? Daniel's jaw tightened. Matt. An awkward beat passed between them. Matt gave a weak smile. You look good. Daniel said nothing. I did not know you were in the city. I have been, Daniel said. Not exactly easy to miss. Unless you do not want to see. Matt shifted uncomfortably. Look, I heard what happened. With your daughter. With the house. I tried to reach out, but... Daniel raised a hand. You do not have to. Matt nodded. Right. Yeah. I am just glad to see you getting back on your feet. That phrase, getting back on your feet, landed heavy. But Daniel just gave a slow nod. Yeah. Me too. He left before Matt could offer anything else. The taste of respect. That afternoon, Daniel walked through the city not as a ghost, but as a man with a destination. People still passed him without looking twice. But this time, it did not hurt. They were not avoiding him. They simply saw a man walking with purpose and gave him space. He stopped at a street vendor near Grant Park. A middle-aged woman stood behind the cart, selling hot pretzels and paper cups of soup. Daniel reached into his pocket and handed her a $5 bill. One chicken noodle, please, he said. She smiled. You got it, sweetheart. He sat on a bench beneath a tree just beginning to blossom. Steam rose from the soup, curling around his fingers. It was salty and hot and filled with soft noodles, bits of carrot, tender chicken. It was not gourmet. But it was dignity in a cup. A small thing, maybe. But Daniel knew now, small things rebuild you. One spoonful at a time. The next step. The following Tuesday, Daniel returned to Glasswell Capital. He wore the new clothes, the jacket pressed, his shoes polished with a napkin and tap water. The receptionist greeted him with a smile that felt genuine. Mr. Callahan is in conference room B. He said you are not a guest, you are on the team now. Daniel felt something in his chest tighten and swell. On the team. Facing the room. Conference room B was glass-walled and filled with professionals, suits, tablets, eyes that scanned quickly. They barely looked up as Daniel entered. Ethan stood at the head of the table. Everyone, he said. This is Daniel Price. He is here to help us understand what we missed. Some heads nodded. One woman raised an eyebrow. You were homeless, she asked, not cruelly, but with sharp curiosity. Daniel met her gaze. Yes. For 6 years. She paused. What changed? He thought about it. Then said, someone trusted me before I had proven I deserved it. So I tried to prove I did. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. A voice that matters. They talked for over an hour. Daniel explained how job fairs feel like judgment. How resumes make you relive everything you lost. How shelters breed silence because no one wants to remember. He spoke plainly. Clearly. without apology. By the time he finished, no one looked bored. They looked awake. Ethan smiled. "That," he said, "is what we build from." Daniel exhaled. For the first time in years, he was not surviving. He was contributing. The walk home. That evening, Daniel did not go back to the shelter. He had earned enough for a night in a cheap hotel on LaSalle Street. It smelled like cleaning fluid and old smoke. But the sheets were clean. The water was hot. And when he looked in the mirror, the man staring back did not flinch. He smiled. Then whispered aloud, to no one in particular, "Not bad for a guy with new shoes." Part 4, The Man with the Apple Pie. The hotel room was warm. Quiet. It had the kind of silence that Daniel Price had forgotten, one that did not come from fear or loneliness, but from peace. The heater hummed softly under the window, and the curtains swayed just slightly with the breeze from the cracked pane. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach, but they were clean. The mattress did not sag in the middle. The pillow held its shape. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. It still felt unnatural to sleep in comfort. For years, he had trained himself to never relax too deeply, never sleep too soundly. On the street, rest was a risk. But here? He allowed himself 10 full minutes of stillness. Then his stomach reminded him he had not eaten since that soup the day before. A craving from long ago. He did not know why it hit him so hard that morning, but the thought crept into his mind like a whisper from an old life. Apple pie. Not just any pie. The kind his mother used to make, flaky crust, cinnamon-rich filling, warm enough to steam against the kitchen window in late autumn. She would serve it with vanilla ice cream that melted too fast. He had not tasted pie in, 10 years? Maybe longer. He closed his eyes and could almost smell it. Sweet. Spiced. Comforting. He stood up, slipped into his new coat, and headed out. Today, he was going to find himself a slice of apple pie. The search. It was a strange thing to seek. Most diners in Chicago lean toward fast food, fried breakfasts, or the occasional sandwich shop. The corner cafes offered croissants and scones. Chain bakeries had pumpkin or pecan, but apple? Apple was harder to come by, at least the real kind, not the factory-sweetened triangles shoved into plastic wrap. He asked around. The first server shrugged. We might have some tomorrow. The second smiled. Only carry cherry right now. The third, a tired man behind a deli counter, pointed him toward an address in Pilsen. Go to Rose's, he said. They still bake like grandmothers used to. Daniel thanked him. Took the bus. Walked 6 blocks. The wind tugged at his collar. His legs ached by the time he reached the small brick building with green trim and lace curtains in the window. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. Rose's. The air smelled like cinnamon and slow-roasted pork. Behind the counter stood a short woman with salt and pepper hair and hands dusted in flour. She was wiping down a pie dish when she looked up and saw him. Sit anywhere, she said. You hungry? Daniel nodded. I was told you make apple pie. The woman smiled. Not a polite smile, but one earned over many years of hearing that sentence. I do. Fresh this morning. Still warm. He took a seat near the window, removed his coat, and tried not to look like someone who had been hungry for more than just food. A slice of memory. The plate arrived with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred things. A large triangle of pie, the crust golden and gently crisped at the edge, the filling thick with soft apples, dark syrup, and flecks of nutmeg. Beside it, a scoop of vanilla ice cream rested like a pearl on polished ceramic. Daniel picked up the fork with care. His first bite was cautious. The second nearly made him close his eyes. By the third, he was no longer in Rose's. He was back at his mother's kitchen table, sun pouring through the window, his daughter laughing in the next room. He was whole again, for just a moment. When he finished, he set the fork down slowly. "You enjoyed it?" Rosa asked, pouring fresh coffee. He nodded. "You have no idea." A quiet conversation. Rosa sat across from him during the lull between lunch and the early dinner crowd. "You look like someone who needed that pie more than most." Daniel offered a small, tired smile. "It reminded me of something I lost. Something I thought I forgot." She folded her hands. "My husband used to say food is not just about hunger. It is about memory. About home." He nodded slowly. That is exactly what it was. They talked a little more. She asked if he had work. He told her briefly about Ethan Callahan, about the outreach project, about finding a wallet that turned into more than he expected. "You returned it," she said, as if confirming something she already knew. Of course, she repeated, satisfied. Before he left, she handed him another slice of pie in a small cardboard box. "No charge," she said. "Please." "I am not giving it to you because you need it," she said firmly. "I am giving it because you deserve it." He held the box like it might break. "Thank you." Outside again. The sky was darker now, clouds gathering in soft swells above the rooftops. Daniel walked slowly, not because his legs were tired, but because he wanted to hold on to the moment a little longer. The pie warmed his hands through the box. His belly was full. His chest felt something close to peace. At the next block, he saw a man curled up against a closed storefront. Blanket over his shoulders. No shoes. No movement. Daniel paused. Walked over. Knelt. "Hey," he said gently. The man looked up. Young. Maybe 22. Eyes wide with sleep and mistrust. "You hungry?" The man blinked. Nodded once. Daniel opened the box. "I cannot promise much. But this is the best apple pie in the city. Maybe the world." The man took the box with shaking hands. Daniel handed him a napkin, then sat down beside him for a while. Neither of them spoke. They just watched the city go by. Returned to the hotel. That night, back at the hotel, Daniel stood in the mirror again. Same face. Same lines. But something had changed behind his eyes. He was not just surviving. He was living. And for the first time in years, he thought, maybe I am allowed to have good things again. Part 5, The Interview Lunch. The following Thursday, Daniel Price woke early to the sound of rain tapping the hotel window like a memory trying to come in. The sky was the color of old newspaper, and the street below shimmered in pools of silver light. He sat up slowly, taking in the small, neat room bed made, shoes placed carefully beside the nightstand, clothes folded on the single chair. He had begun to build routines again. Not because anyone expected him to, but because they made him feel real. He stood, dressed in the clean shirt and trousers he had picked up from the nonprofit, and laced his shoes with deliberate care. When he finished, he looked at himself in the mirror and took a deep breath. Today was not just a visit. It was an interview. A new kind of nerves. Ethan Callahan had called the day before. "We are ready to bring you in for a formal meeting." Think of it as a conversation, not an interrogation. Some of our senior partners want to meet the man who changed the tone of the room. Daniel had laughed awkwardly at that, unsure whether it was a compliment or a setup. But Ethan's voice had been sincere. Encouraging. And now, standing in that small hotel bathroom, Daniel felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope with teeth. It could bite. But it was alive. Getting there. The bus was crowded, damp with umbrella drips and morning breath. Daniel held the rail with one hand, trying not to wrinkle the shirt he had pressed using a towel on the hotel's radiator. He stepped off 5 blocks early so he could walk the last stretch and let the rain mist off him before he arrived. He passed Rosa's on the way and waved through the window. She lifted a flour-dusted hand in return, then pointed to the counter. A small brown paper bag waited on the ledge. He stepped inside for a moment. "I knew you would come by," she said. "You cannot think straight on an empty stomach." He opened the bag to find a ham and egg sandwich on a warm roll, wrapped in parchment. It smelled like someone still believed in him. "Thank you," he said, quiet and grateful. "You come back after," she said. "Tell me how it went." The first real bite. Daniel sat on a bench near the river, the wind soft against his face, the city rumbling all around him. He unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. It was simple, but it was perfect. The egg was still warm, the ham smoky and just salty enough, the bread soft with a toasted crust. He closed his eyes. It had been a long time since a meal had tasted like permission. Permission to keep going. To try again. To believe something could come from all of this. He finished the sandwich slowly, savoring every bite. Then stood. And walked to the building where his new life might be waiting. Glass and Judgment. The lobby of Glasswell Capital was just as polished as before. Marble floors. Gold trim. A woman in a red blazer at the reception desk smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Price, welcome back. Conference room C. Take the elevators to the 20th floor." He nodded. "Good luck," she added. The elevator doors opened like a sigh. Inside, Daniel checked his reflection one last time. He combed his fingers through his hair, squared his shoulders, and whispered aloud, "You are ready." He was not certain. But he said it anyway. The table. Conference room C was larger than the others. A long glass table stretched from wall to wall. 7 people sat around it, men and women in tailored clothes, styluses in hand, eyes that measured everything. Ethan stood at the head of the table. He smiled when Daniel entered. "Everyone, this is Daniel Price. He is not here to impress you. He is here to remind us why we started this in the first place." Daniel swallowed. Saturday. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a woman with silver-rimmed glasses said, "Tell us who you are." Daniel took a breath. "I was a factory foreman for 15 years. When the plant closed, I lost everything. Job. House. Family. I spent 6 years on the street. And I learned more about people in those 6 years than I ever did behind a desk." A man in a sharp pinstripe suit leaned forward. "And now?" "Now," Daniel said, "I am trying to turn that into something useful." The unspoken truth. The questions came one by one. What do you believe the unhoused need most? Why do programs fail? What would you do differently? Daniel answered plainly. Not with statistics. With stories. About sharing meals in alleys. About how a pair of socks could mean more than a sermon. About the way some shelters talked about dignity but treated people like problems. At some point, the questions stopped feeling like a test. They began to sound like respect. The decision. After 45 minutes, Ethan stood. "Daniel, could you give us the room for a moment?" He nodded, stood, stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. He waited. 10 minutes. 12. He stared at the skyline through the window. He did not pray. He simply waited. Then the door opened. Ethan stepped out, face unreadable. "You hungry?" he asked. Daniel blinked. "Always." Ethan smiled. "Good. We have a tradition here. The table of peers." 10 minutes later, Daniel found himself seated at a different table, a long wooden one in the staff lounge, surrounded by the same people from the interview. Only this time, they had plates. The company catered lunch every Thursday. Today, it was roasted chicken, rice pilaf, green beans and garlic butter, and fresh bread with soft, herb cheese. Daniel hesitated. Ethan gestured. "Please." He took a plate. The first bite of chicken was tender, seasoned just right. The green beans had bite, not mush. The bread was warm. He ate slowly. Carefully. But not like he was afraid. Like he belonged. Someone across the table asked him a question about his old factory. Someone else asked him what book he had read last. They were not talking down to him. They were talking to him. The offer. After the meal, Ethan pulled him aside. "We want to bring you on. Not just as a consultant, but as an advisor. Part-time at first. But if it works." Daniel nodded, his throat too tight for words. Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "You earned this. Not today. The day you chose to be better when no one was watching." Daniel exhaled. And for the first time in years, his chest did not ache from it. Part 6, Dinner Alone, but Not Lonely. The afternoon after Daniel Price received the offer to become a part-time advisor at Glasswell Capital, he found himself wandering through the city without any particular destination. His steps were slow, thoughtful. The decision had been made, and yet a quiet disbelief still echoed in his chest. He had a job again. Not a handout. Not a pity position. A job. Something earned not through charity, but through presence. Through honesty. Through everything he had become, rather than what he had lost. The thought felt heavy and fragile all at once, like a piece of stained glass held in uncertain hands. He walked until the streets changed from shining marble to brick and iron, where old signs hung over family-owned storefronts and the windows glowed with the flicker of early evening lights. His stomach reminded him gently that it was time for dinner. But not just anything. Tonight, he wanted to choose. The restaurant with no name. He spotted the place by accident. A corner cafe with no sign above the door, just a chalkboard out front that read, "We serve what we cook. Sit. Breathe. Eat slow." The windows were fogged from the inside, and the smell wafting out as a customer opened the door was thick with butter, rosemary, and something warm that Daniel could not name. He stepped inside. The space was small. Wooden tables, most of them mismatched. Candlelight flickered in little glass jars. There was no menu, only a hostess with a smile like she had been waiting for him specifically. "One for dinner?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. He had eaten alone for so many years that it no longer felt strange. But this was different. This was by choice. "Yes," he said. "Just me." "Perfect," she replied, as though that was the best answer she had heard all day. The first course. The waiter brought water with lemon and a cloth napkin. Then, without asking, he placed a shallow bowl in front of Daniel. "Roasted carrot soup," he said. "With ginger, garlic, and a touch of cream." The soup was the color of autumn leaves, smooth and fragrant. Daniel leaned over the bowl and let the steam wash over his face. It reminded him of his wife's cooking, years ago, before the silence, before the loss, before he had stopped coming home for dinner. The first spoonful was gentle. Earthy. Sweet. The second was deeper. By the third, Daniel had to close his eyes. Not because it was rich, but because it made him feel nourished in a way he had not in a very long time. A table beside him. At the next table, an older couple sat quietly, holding hands between bites of risotto and wine. They reminded him of his parents' quiet love, the kind that did not need to be spoken to be understood. At another table, a father and daughter shared a plate of pasta, their laughter soft and rhythmic, like music that no one had written but both of them knew by heart. Daniel was alone, but not lonely. He felt included. Part of the rhythm of the room. Not a shadow outside the window, watching from the dark. But a man. In a chair. With a place. The main course. The waiter returned, cleared the empty soup bowl with a respectful nod, and placed the main dish before him. Braised beef short ribs, he said. On a bed of garlic mashed potatoes, with roasted Brussels sprouts and a red wine reduction. Daniel blinked. He had eaten from garbage bins. He had scraped stale crackers from under park benches. He had tasted shame with every swallow. And now, he sat before a plate that looked like it had come from a magazine. But it was real. He cut into the beef. Tender. Juicy. The knife slid through like silk. The first bite made him sit back in his chair. The potatoes were smooth, buttery, with just enough salt to brighten the flavor of the meat. The sprouts were crisped at the edges, slightly bitter, balanced by the sweetness of the glaze. He chewed slowly. Thoughtfully. Every bite felt like a step forward. Every swallow like the erasing of a scar. The call. Halfway through his meal, his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his coat pocket, the old screen cracked at the corner. The name read, Shelter, Southside Desk. He frowned. He had not been there in nearly a week. He answered. Hello? A woman's voice replied, firm but kind. Is this Daniel Price? Yes. We have a young man here. 17. He asked for you by name. Daniel blinked. I do not. He said you met once in line last month. Shared a sandwich. Said you told him to remember his name. The memory flickered. A kid in a hoodie. White eyes. Quiet. Grateful. He refused to bed unless we called you, the woman added. Said you would know what to say. Daniel looked at the half-eaten meal in front of him. Then at the people around him, lost in their comfort. Then he stood. A decision. The hostess blinked as he approached. Something wrong? He nodded. I have to go. But the meal was perfect. She smiled. We will save your dessert. Daniel reached into his pocket. Placed two $20 bills on the counter. More than he could afford to spend twice. But this was not just dinner. It was transformation. He stepped back into the cold. Back to the shelter. The shelter was the same as always, crowded, tense, filled with voices trying not to sound afraid. The woman at the front desk waved him in. He is in the common room. Daniel walked past the peeling paint, the worn furniture, and into a room filled with old men, tired mothers, and children playing too close to the walls. The boy sat alone in the corner, hoodie pulled over his head. When he saw Daniel, he stood. Hey, Daniel said gently. I did not know where else to go, the boy replied. They said I had to check in, but I thought maybe if you were here. Daniel nodded. He sat beside him. No one tells you this part, he said. That it is not the fall that breaks you. It is the landing. And the silence after. The boy looked down. I do not know who I am anymore. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. You are someone, he said. That is where it starts. A shared meal. He pulled something from his coat pocket. Rose's sandwich. Still warm. He had forgotten it was there. He handed it to the boy. The kid's hands trembled. Is this for me? Daniel nodded. Eat slow. They sat together. No ceremony. No pity. Just two people. Sharing something warm. Part 7, Soup for Strangers. The morning after Daniel Price sat beside a boy in the corner of the shelter and gave away the last of his dinner, he stood in front of a fogged-up mirror in his hotel room, towel draped over his shoulders, steam rising from the hot shower behind him. The mirror reflected more than just his face now. It reflected the weight of choices and something new. Direction. His job at Glasswell Capital's community initiative was scheduled to begin in full next week. Ethan had already emailed him outlines, program notes, and meeting times. But Daniel had something else planned first. Something he had chosen to do. The soup kitchen on 18th Street. He walked 7 blocks to a church basement he had passed dozens of times but never entered. A green sign above the narrow door read, "Free soup. Free bread. No names. Just meals." The place smelled like onions and warmth. Volunteers moved through the space with calm urgency, stacking trays, pouring pitchers of water, arranging bowls on tables already crowded with guests who spoke little and chewed quietly. Daniel approached a woman near the back, her gray sweater streaked with flour. She wore no name tag, but her posture radiated authority. "I would like to help," Daniel said. She glanced at his shoes, his clean shirt, the way he stood. "Are you here to fulfill a volunteer requirement?" "No," he said. "I am here because I know what it feels like to eat here." She studied him a moment longer. Then handed him an apron. The potato station. He spent the first 2 hours peeling potatoes, dozens of them, stacked in crates along the steel prep tables. The room echoed with water running and knives tapping rhythmically on cutting boards. The other volunteers worked in quiet concentration, moving like dancers in a kitchen choreographed by necessity. Daniel's hands worked faster than he expected. The rhythm comforted him. 1 potato. 2. 12. As he peeled, he listened. Stories floated across the room. A woman described walking 6 miles for bus fare. An older man joked about how he used to eat steak and now lived off peanut butter packets. None of it was dramatized. No one complained. They just told the truth. And peeled more potatoes. A bowl for himself. Later that morning, the lead cook, an older man with a deep voice and a limp, called Daniel over. "Break time. Grab a bowl." Daniel hesitated. "I am all right." "You work. You eat," the man said. "That is the rule here." So Daniel took a bowl. The soup was thick, potato, leek, and carrot, with bits of ham and a swirl of cream. He carried it to the end of a long table, sat, and took his first spoonful. It was hot. Rich. Just salty enough. The kind of meal that sat low in the belly and told the body it was going to be all right. Across from him, a woman in her 30s sat with her daughter, who held a plastic spoon in both hands. The little girl smiled at him, cheeks flushed from the cold. Daniel smiled back. "Good soup," he said. The girl nodded. Best in the world. He could not argue. Why, he returned. That afternoon, Daniel stayed to help clean. He wiped tables, carried trays to the back, stacked chairs. The work left his hands red and raw, but he felt useful in a way the boardroom never could replicate. Before he left, the woman in the gray sweater handed him a folded flyer. "Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks," she said. "We serve 500. We could use someone like you." Daniel accepted the flyer and tucked it carefully into his coat. I will be here. She nodded once. We will hold you to it. A call from Ethan. That evening, back at the hotel, his phone buzzed. Daniel, Ethan said. Quick question for you. We are considering adding a community meal night, something hosted by our team once a month. Would you be willing to help us shape it? Daniel leaned back in the chair. I was just thinking about soup, he said. And what it teaches you. Ethan chuckled. You are going to have to explain that. Daniel did. Slowly. Thoughtfully. And by the end of the call, the initiative had its newest program. Second Saturdays, meals and conversations. And Daniel was in charge. An unexpected guest. The next morning, Daniel returned to the soup kitchen. He was not on schedule. He just wanted to see it again to remind himself where he came from and what still needed doing. As he approached the door, he stopped. A familiar face stood outside, hands in his pockets, head down. The boy from the shelter. Daniel walked over quietly. You hungry? The boy looked up, surprised, then nodded. Come inside. They sat together at a corner table. 2 bowls. 2 slices of bread. 2 people learning how to be human again. A quiet lesson. Daniel did not ask questions. He did not offer advice. He simply ate. And let the boy eat beside him. After they finished, Daniel stood and cleared their trays. The boy followed without being asked. They washed dishes side by side. No one said anything. And it was enough. A cup of coffee and a plan. Later, Daniel took the boy to a cafe near the train station. Nothing fancy. Just hot coffee, warm bagels, and a small table in the back. They sat across from one another. You ever worked before? Daniel asked. Helped my uncle fix drywall once. Got paid in leftover pizza. Daniel smiled. That counts. You think I could get a job? Daniel took a sip of his coffee. I think you already started. The boy looked down at the bagel in front of him. Thank you, he said softly. For the soup. And for sitting with me. Daniel nodded. Sometimes, that is all someone needs. Part 8, Headlines and Hash Browns. It began with a phone call Daniel Price did not expect. He was sitting at his small table in the corner of the hotel room, a notepad open beside a slowly cooling cup of black coffee. He had been making a real list, for the first time in years. Things to do. People to check on. Ideas for the second Saturday's community meal initiative. The phone rang once. Twice. He picked it up. Hello? A cheerful voice responded. Is this Mr. Daniel Price? Yes. My name is Clara Ortiz. I am a features reporter with the Chicago Gazette. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. Daniel frowned. About what? I believe you know Mr. Ethan Callahan. He mentioned you in a recent interview about Glasswell Capital's new outreach division. He said you had an incredible story. Daniel went quiet. Clara continued gently. Would you be open to sharing it? Just a conversation. Off the record until you say otherwise. He glanced at the list in front of him. At the word kindness, scribbled in the corner. I suppose I could meet you for breakfast. The meeting. They met at a diner called the Maple Fork, an old-fashioned place with red booths, spinning stools, and coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs the color of storm clouds. The air smelled like eggs, bacon, and decades of good mornings. Clara sat near the window, laptop in her bag, notepad open, pen in hand. She stood as Daniel approached and shook his hand with surprising warmth. I really appreciate you making time, she said. Breakfast is a pretty good reason, he replied, half smiling. They sat. A waitress arrived with menus. Daniel ordered the hash brown plate, 2 eggs over easy, sausage, and a side of toast. Clara ordered the same. Equal footing, she said. He nodded. The conversation began with small questions. Where did you grow up? What did you do before? How did you and Mr. Callahan meet? He told her everything. The factory closing. The nights in shelters. The wallet. The choice. He left out none of it. Clara listened without interruption. And when the food arrived, hot and gleaming with butter and spice, she put down her pen and said, "Let us eat first. Stories taste better with hash browns." The meal. The hash browns were golden and crisp at the edges, soft in the center. The sausage was well seasoned, not too greasy, and the eggs spilled yolk like sun over the plate. The toast was thick, cut from real bread, and buttered to the corners. Daniel ate slowly, savoring it. Clara did, too. There was something sacred about a breakfast that had been earned. Daniel had eaten many things while sitting on curbs, cold beans, stale crackers, leftover fast food from torn bags. But this was different. This was a meal served without judgment. It reminded him that simple food can feel like dignity when you no longer take it for granted. Clara finally picked up her pen again. "You know," she said, "most people would have kept the money. No one would have blamed you." "I would have blamed myself," he said quietly. The headline. Clara called 2 days later. "I wanted to let you know the article will run on Sunday. Front page of the features section." Daniel rubbed his temple. "That is not necessary. It is honest," she said. "And we need more of that." He sighed. "All right." She hesitated. "Would you like me to read you the headline?" He nodded. He slept on the streets. Then he returned a wallet. What happened next changed everything. He was quiet for a long moment. "That sounds like someone else." "No," Clara said. "That sounds like you." Reactions. The story went live at dawn. By 9 in the morning, Daniel's phone was ringing again. This time, it was Ethan. "You need to see what is happening," he said. Daniel walked to the nearest newsstand. The man behind the counter held up the paper with a grin. "You the guy from the story?" Daniel nodded. The man handed him a copy. "No charge." Daniel opened it and stared at the photo Clara had taken, him sitting in the Maple Fork diner, coffee in hand, eyes half shadowed, quiet but not ashamed. The article was long. Honest. It painted him not as a saint, but as a man who made a choice. That was all he had ever wanted. Too much attention. By noon, the shelter where Daniel had once stayed was calling him, asking if he could come speak to their residents. A podcast emailed him about a guest interview. 3 different local businesses offered to sponsor the second Saturday's program. Daniel found himself pacing the small hotel room. He should have been grateful. But instead, he felt overwhelmed. He did not want to be a symbol. He wanted to be useful. That afternoon, he returned to the soup kitchen, apron in hand, hoping to lose himself in potatoes. But the lead cook stopped him at the door. "You are on the front page of the newspaper." Daniel winced. "So I heard." "You are still peeling today," the cook said. "Fame does not make you less useful." Daniel smiled. Then got to work. A simple dinner. That evening, Daniel sat in a different corner of the hotel room, the newspaper folded neatly beside a white plastic bag from the corner market. Inside the bag, a can of tomato soup. a sleeve of saltine crackers, a small bar of dark chocolate. He poured the soup into a mug, warmed it over the hot plate, stirred it slowly. It was not gourmet. It was not from a restaurant. But it was his. He dipped the crackers, bite by bite, and thought about how the same soup had once been shared with 5 other men huddled beneath an overpass. Now, it was just him. He ate slowly. Grateful. Grounded. And when he finished, he placed the chocolate on the table. He did not eat it. Not yet. Some things were worth saving. A message from someone else. That night, a text arrived from a number he did not recognize. My father left when I was 10. I have been angry for a long time. I read your story. You made me cry. Thank you for not giving up. Daniel stared at the message. Typed slowly. I almost did. But someone saw me. Now I try to see others. The response came a few minutes later. You saw me today. Daniel turned off the light. Sat in the dark. And smiled. Part 9, The Table for Two. The next day, Daniel Price sat alone in a cafe on the edge of the West Loop, watching his coffee grow cold. The attention from the newspaper article had not faded. In fact, it seemed to grow louder by the hour. Strangers stopped him on the street. A woman at the bus stop had handed him a note that simply said, "Thank you for reminding us what decency looks like." He had smiled politely, nodded, and walked away. But the truth was, he was tired. Not because people meant harm, but because it was hard to hold the weight of their hope. The invitation. The night before, Ethan Callahan had sent a message. Dinner tomorrow. My place. Just you and me. I will cook. We will talk. Daniel had hesitated. He liked Ethan. Trusted him, even. But the idea of stepping into a man's home, someone so far removed from Daniel's old life, brought up feelings Daniel could not quite name. Insecurity. Distance. Maybe even guilt. He replied anyway. I will be there. Now, as the clock neared 6, he folded his newspaper, finished the last sip of lukewarm coffee, and began the walk toward Ethan's address. The neighborhood of glass. Ethan lived on the north side, in a brownstone that looked like it had grown from the sidewalk, solid, symmetrical, surrounded by trees that had been trimmed like works of art. As Daniel approached, he saw warm light pouring from the windows, shadows of movement inside. He hesitated at the front steps. His coat felt heavier than usual. He raised his hand. Knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Ethan stood in rolled-up sleeves, an apron around his waist, a wooden spoon in his hand. You came, he said. Daniel smiled. I said I would. Inside the quiet. The house was warm without being pretentious. Books lined the shelves. The air smelled of rosemary, garlic, and something faintly sweet. Daniel stepped inside, removed his coat, and took in the quiet jazz playing from an old speaker in the corner. Ethan gestured toward the kitchen. I hope you are hungry. I am. Ethan handed him a glass of water with lemon. I do not drink, Daniel said quietly. Ethan nodded. Neither do I. Not anymore. They sat at a table in the kitchen, wooden, scratched in places, clearly used often. A dish rested in the center, covered with a lid. Steam danced around the edges. The meal. Ethan removed the lid. Inside, roasted chicken thighs, browned perfectly, resting on a bed of wild rice mixed with caramelized onions, chopped almonds, and dried cranberries. The vegetables were roasted carrots, parsnips, and beets, glistening with olive oil and fresh thyme. Daniel stared at it, surprised. You made this? My mother taught me, Ethan said. She used to say that a proper dinner can soften even the hardest truth. They served themselves. The first bite was extraordinary. The chicken was moist, flavored with lemon and rosemary, the rice earthy and slightly sweet. The vegetables added a grounding warmth to each mouthful. Daniel closed his eyes briefly after the third bite. It tastes like Sunday. Ethan smiled. That is what I was going for. The conversation. They ate in silence for a while, interrupted only by the sound of silverware and quiet jazz. Finally, Ethan leaned back in his chair. You have handled all of this better than I would have. Daniel set down his fork. I have not handled it. I have just endured it. Ethan nodded. That is fair. Daniel looked around the kitchen, then back at him. Why did you really ask me here? Ethan paused. I needed to say something that did not fit in an email. Daniel waited. Ethan exhaled. I think you should be the face of the initiative. Daniel blinked. What? I want you on our materials. On our website. Speaking publicly. Not just behind the scenes. People trust you. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. I am not a symbol. No, Ethan agreed. You are a reminder. Daniel shook his head. I do not know how to do that. I do not want people to put me on a pedestal. Then tell them not to, Ethan said gently. But tell them anyway. The dessert. After the plates had been cleared, Ethan returned to the table with 2 small bowls. Inside, poached pears and red wine syrup, topped with a dollop of whipped cream and a sprig of mint. Daniel stared at it. I have never had this in my life. Ethan chuckled. Me neither. I looked it up an hour ago. Daniel took a spoonful. The pear was soft, infused with spice, cinnamon, clove, citrus. The cream was airy and cool. It was sweet. Elegant. Unnecessary. And yet entirely earned. This is ridiculous, Daniel muttered, finishing the last bite. And perfect, Ethan replied. A thought before leaving. As Daniel stood to leave, Ethan walked him to the door. Think about what I said, Ethan said quietly. You have a voice. And people need to hear it from someone who did not have a script written for him. Daniel nodded. I will think. Outside, the city was still humming. But Daniel stood still for a long time before walking down the steps. A message waiting. Back in his room, Daniel removed his shoes, loosened his collar, and sat on the edge of the bed. He turned on his phone. One message blinked on the screen. From Rosa. A girl came in today. Said she saw you in the newspaper. Said she used to live under the viaduct with her brother. She read your story out loud in the soup line. Everyone clapped. Just thought you should know. Daniel read the message twice. Then once more. He looked at his reflection in the darkened window. He still looked like himself. But somehow, he felt taller. Not in pride. In purpose. A quiet meal alone. That night, Daniel did not eat again. But he made tea chamomile with a spoon of honey. He drank it slowly. No one was watching. There were no headlines. No thank you notes. Just warmth in a cup. And a man who now knew that his story, told in his own voice, could light a path for someone else. He sipped once more. And whispered to himself. I will speak. Part 10, speaking for the first time. The hall smelled like freshly brewed coffee and worn carpet. Folding chairs were lined up in clean rows, filled with unfamiliar faces. At the front stood a modest wooden podium, beside a table with a pitcher of water and a stack of blank note cards. Daniel Price stood just outside the doorway, staring through the small window in the metal door. His hands were tucked in the pockets of his coat, fingers curled into fists. He was not sure why he had said yes. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was courage trying to disguise itself. Ethan had called 3 days earlier. The local community center is hosting a public panel on the topic of second chances, he had said. They asked if someone from the new initiative could speak. I told them I knew the perfect person. Daniel had laughed then. But now, as the sound of chairs shifting and people murmuring reached his ears, he did not feel like laughing. He felt like running. The room of faces. Inside, the room was bright with ceiling lights. People chatted in low tones. Some wore name tags. Others carried clipboards. But most were simply there to listen. Ethan stood near the front, nodding to the moderator, a middle-aged woman in a navy blouse. He spotted Daniel through the window and gave a thumbs up. Daniel closed his eyes. Breathed once. Then stepped inside. Taking the stage. When he reached the podium, the moderator introduced him. Please welcome Daniel Price, a man whose story many of you may have read last week in the Gazette. He is not here to lecture. He is here to speak the truth about how quickly a life can change, and how kindness, when returned, can change it again. There was a quiet round of applause. Daniel took a sip of water, placed both hands on the edge of the podium, and stared at the note cards. He had written nothing. He had not known what to say. So instead, he looked up. And began. The speech. I am not a speaker, he said. I am not trained in storytelling. I do not have a degree in social work or public policy. I am not an expert. He paused. But I am someone who remembers what it feels like to sit in a room like this and feel invisible. A few heads nodded. He continued. I worked hard once. I had a house. A family. Then the factory shut down. I lost everything, and the world did not stop to explain it to me. I lived on the street. For a long time. I made a lot of mistakes. But I never stole. I never lied to myself about how I got there. His voice wavered, but he steadied it. Then I found a wallet. A nice one. Full of cash. And I made a choice. A silence settled over the room. I gave it back. Not because I am noble. Not because I wanted something in return. I gave it back because I remembered who I was before the fall. And I wanted to be that man again. The applause. When he finished, he looked up again. The room was silent. Then someone in the back stood up and clapped. Another followed. Then the whole room. Daniel stepped back from the podium. He did not smile. He simply nodded, once, deeply. And returned to his seat. The buffet. After the panel ended, the staff rolled out tables of food covered with crisp white cloths. Volunteers uncovered aluminum trays filled with baked ziti, steamed vegetables, garlic bread, and salad tossed with vinaigrette. Daniel lingered at the back of the room, unsure whether he belonged in line with everyone else. He did not feel like a guest. But he was not a ghost anymore, either. Ethan came up beside him. You did well. I was shaking the entire time. No one noticed, Ethan said. They heard you. They moved to the buffet table. Daniel filled his plate, just enough to be polite. A small serving of pasta, a piece of garlic bread, 2 spoonfuls of vegetables. He found a table in the corner, away from the center of the chatter, and sat down. The bread was warm, the pasta simple but rich with cheese and tomato. The vegetables were soft, seasoned just right. Nothing fancy. But it was food meant to be shared. And Daniel ate it with a kind of quiet reverence. The girl with the camera. Halfway through his meal, a girl approached his table. Teenage. Nervous. She carried a small camera and wore a press badge that said, Student Media. Mr. Price? He looked up. Yes? I am sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say. I am working on a piece for my school paper about people who survive. And I think you are the first person I have seen who actually makes me believe it. Daniel smiled, slow and careful. I appreciate that. Could I take your photo? He nodded. She raised the camera. Clicked once. Thank you. Good luck with your story, he said. She smiled. I already have it. The message in a napkin. After most of the crowd had left, Daniel cleared his plate and picked up his coat. At his table, he noticed a folded napkin. It had not been there before. He opened it. Scrawled in pen. I was going to quit tomorrow. After hearing you, I think I will stay. One more week. One more try. No signature. No name. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Then tucked the napkin into his coat pocket. A dinner to end the day. That night, Daniel returned to the small diner he had visited on the day of his first newspaper interview. The waitress recognized him. Back for the hash browns? She asked, smiling. Something like that. He ordered a turkey sandwich on rye, a side of coleslaw, and a bowl of split pea soup. When the food arrived, he did not dive in. He sat for a moment, watching the steam rise, breathing it in. The sandwich was warm, the turkey thick and layered with mustard and pickles. The coleslaw was crunchy, the soup hearty and full of flavor. He ate slowly. Alone, but not lonely. And when he finished, he left a generous tip beneath the napkin. On it, he wrote one word. Thanks. Part 11, Burnt Bread and Bitter Truths. The following morning, the streets of Chicago felt heavier. It was not the weather, though the sky had grayed and the wind snapped harder than usual. It was not the noise or the cold. It was something internal, something Daniel Price could not quite name. He had spoken in front of strangers. He had eaten among applause. He had read a handwritten napkin that told him he had changed a life. But instead of feeling proud, he felt the old weight creeping in. Not shame, he had made peace with that. No, this was doubt. What if he could not live up to the version of himself people now believed in? What if their hope was misplaced? What if all of this had been luck? Back at Rosa's. He walked to Rosa's bakery without knowing he was heading there. It was not on the way to the community center or Glasswell Capital. It was not necessary. But it was comfort. Familiarity without pressure. The bell chimed as he stepped inside. Warmth embraced him immediately, flour, cinnamon, yeast rising in unseen ovens. Rosa stood behind the counter, slicing loaf after loaf of sourdough with practiced ease. She looked up. Her face lit up like he had come home. Well, look who fame did not steal, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Daniel smiled weakly. Do you ever burn anything? She laughed. Only the stuff that is not loved. He looked at the chalkboard menu. The same items. The same gentle prices. A promise of steadiness. Coffee and toast? Rosa asked, already reaching for a mug. He nodded. Yes, please. A cracked morning. He sat in the same corner booth, his shoulders hunched slightly, trying to shake the fog in his chest. Rosa brought over a ceramic mug filled with dark roast and placed a small plate in front of him. 2 thick slices of whole grain toast, one with a pat of butter melting into golden softness, the other with darkened edges, crust slightly charred. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "This one burnt?" he asked. She shrugged. "A little. But some days, you take what is real, not what is perfect." He took a bite of the dark slice. It crunched more than it should have. It carried a bitterness. But beneath that warmth, he chewed slowly. "Reminds me of how my daughter used to make toast," he said softly. She never watched the toaster. Always wandered off. Burned half of them. Rosa sat across from him without asking. "What is her name?" "Mia." "Do you talk to her?" Daniel hesitated. "I used to call every year on her birthday. Never left a message. Just wanted to hear the voicemail." Then, the number changed. Rosa reached over and refilled his cup. A visitor from the past. The bell above the door rang again. Daniel did not look up. He was lost in the folds of memory, in the way burned toast could taste like childhood and silence at the same time. But Rosa's voice pulled him back. "You here to see him?" Daniel turned. A woman stood just inside the door. Her coat was damp from the mist outside. Her eyes were familiar, sharp, intelligent, cautious. Her name escaped his lips before he could stop it. "Mary Ann?" She nodded. She looked thinner than he remembered, but stronger, too. Older. A scar of time traced her face, just beneath the cheekbone. Not from injury, from years. "May I sit?" He nodded slowly. "An old pain." They sat in silence for almost a minute. Mary Ann stared at her hands. Daniel stared at the steam rising from his coffee. "I read the article," she said. "I did not know you were still here. I thought you left." "I almost did," he said. "Many times." She looked up. "You gave back a wallet." "I tried to give back more than that." Another pause. "She is in college now," Mary Ann said. "Mia. Environmental science. Wants to save trees and oceans and whatever else the world is burning." Daniel's breath caught. "She is doing well?" "Yes. Stronger than both of us." He nodded. "I am glad." "She asks about you," Mary Ann added. "More than you might believe." Daniel stared at the toast again. She deserved better. Mary Ann looked at him hard. She deserved her father. That is all she wanted. Sharing bread. Rosa appeared with a second plate and placed it gently in front of Mary Ann. A slice of toast. Buttered. A thin smear of homemade jam. No words. Just kindness. Mary Ann blinked. "I have not had breakfast in days," she whispered. Daniel pushed the remaining slice of his toast toward her. "Take it. I have had more than enough lately." Mary Ann smiled. And for the first time in years, they ate together. Two people who had once shared a home, now sharing a table. No accusations. No apologies. Just bread. A question that lingered. After the meal, Mary Ann stood. "I do not know if this means anything," she said. "But Mia will be home next month. Thanksgiving break." Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the table. "Would you like to see her?" He could barely nod. "Then stay where she can find you." She turned to leave. But before she stepped outside, she looked back. "You do not need to fix everything, Daniel. Just be someone she can look at without pain." Then she was gone. Cleaning up. Daniel sat in the booth for a long time after. Rosa brought him a small plate with a cinnamon roll, warm from the oven. On the house, she said. I cannot keep taking from you. You are not, she replied. You are sitting in the chair you earned. He picked up the roll. Pulled it apart slowly. A soft spiral of sugar and spice. Sweet. Messy. Undeniably human. He ate it one bite at a time. And when he finished, he wiped the plate clean with the last piece. Part 12, The Table He Was Never At. Daniel Price could not sleep. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the streets outside the hotel were still but restless. A garbage truck rumbled in the distance. Someone argued into a cell phone half a block away. The city never stopped, not really, it just took turns breathing. He sat at the small table near the window, looking out at the glowing signs and the buildings washed pale by streetlights. The napkin with the message from the youth meeting still rested inside his coat pocket. He had read it 5 times in the past hour. I was going to quit tomorrow. After hearing you, I think I will stay. And now, he could not stop thinking about Mia. She was coming home for Thanksgiving. And Marianne had invited him to try. To show up. Not as a savior. Not as a father with all the answers. Just as himself. It was terrifying. The table he had not touched. There had been so many holidays Daniel had missed. He remembered one Thanksgiving in particular, 4 years ago. He had stood across the street from a soup kitchen that was already full. It had started snowing. His gloves had holes in the thumbs. People inside had clinked glasses and passed trays of sweet potatoes and turkey down long tables. He had turned away before they served dessert. Now, he might get a second chance. But he did not know how to be present anymore. An idea born in the dark. Daniel opened his notebook and began to write. Not just thoughts, but plans. If he was going to sit at a table with his daughter, he would bring more than words. He would bring something real. Not money. Not apologies. Something they could share. Food. But not just any food. Something he had made. The kitchen that said yes. Later that morning, Daniel walked to the soup kitchen on 18th Street. The same one where he had washed dishes, peeled potatoes, and shared silence with strangers who became friends. The head cook, a gruff but kind man named Harold, raised an eyebrow when Daniel asked for a favor. You want to cook in here? Yes, Daniel said. Just for a few hours. I want to try a recipe. I do not have a kitchen of my own. Harold scratched his beard. You burn the place down, I am blaming the reporter who wrote about you. Daniel smiled. Fair. Harold handed him an apron and pointed to the back. You clean up after. Every corner. I always do. The recipe from long ago. Daniel remembered one meal Mia had always loved. Chicken pot pie. Not from a box. Not from a restaurant. But from scratch. He had made it once, when she was 8. Her front tooth had fallen out that morning. She had cried, and he had promised her something warm and special by dinner. He had found a recipe online, followed every step, even though it had taken him 3 hours and a near fight with a pie crust. She had called it the best thing ever. He had not made it since. Gathering the ingredients. Daniel spent the first hour chopping. Carrots. Celery. Onions. Garlic. He boiled the chicken, pulling it apart with 2 forks once it cooled. He made a roux for the sauce, stirring flour and butter until it thickened, then adding milk and broth, watching it turn creamy and golden. He added the vegetables, herbs, and shredded meat, tasting carefully. Salt. Pepper. A touch of thyme. Then came the crust. He rolled the dough with care, floured the surface, pressed it gently into a round pie dish. He poured the filling, sealed the top, and used a knife to carve a small heart into the center. The bake. As the pie cooked, the kitchen filled with its scent. Volunteers passing through paused and peeked. "Smells like childhood," one said. "Smells like I am going to steal a bite," said another. Daniel smiled but said nothing. He was not making it for them. He was making it for her. A moment alone. When the pie cooled, Daniel placed it into a carrier tray someone had donated. He stood alone in the kitchen, steam still clinging to the windows, apron dusted with flour and oil. He looked down at what he had made. Not perfect, but honest. He had not spoken to Mia in almost 6 years. But this pie, this moment, felt like a bridge. He packed it carefully, cleaned the kitchen as promised, and thanked Harold with a handshake. The letter. Back at the hotel, Daniel sat down with a pen and a piece of lined paper. He wrote slowly. "Mia, you probably do not want a long letter, and that is all right. I just wanted to say that I miss you. That I have missed every single day I could have known you better. I know I did not show up the way I should have. I failed at more than one thing. But I never stopped thinking about you. I made something for you. I know it is just a pie. But it was something I made once, for you, when you were little. You liked it. You smiled with your whole face. I do not know if it still tastes the same, but it is from the same hands. I would like to see you. If you are willing. No pressure. Love. Dad." Delivering what mattered. Daniel walked to Marianne's apartment in the late afternoon. The sky was pale blue, touched with gold. He did not knock. He left the covered pie and the letter on the welcome mat, gently placing a stone on top of the folded paper so it would not blow away. Then he turned and walked away. Not out of fear, but because this time, he had already said everything. Dinner at the shelter. That evening, Daniel returned to the shelter, not to sleep, but to serve. They were serving chili that night. He ladled bowls with practiced hands, added bread on the side, and smiled at every person who passed by. When he finally sat down to eat his own bowl, he took the plastic spoon, dipped it into the thick stew, and paused before taking the first bite. Then he smiled. And whispered, just loud enough for no one to hear. "Tomorrow is a new plate." Part 13, Waiting on the Doorbell. Daniel Price awoke to the smell of fresh laundry and black coffee. The morning light crept through the cracked blinds of his modest hotel room, spilling across the floor in thin lines that looked like hope, if hope could be quiet. He had not slept well. His body had rested, but his mind had paced the hallways of memory until sunrise. The pie was gone now. Left at the door of the apartment that used to be home. The letter had been written in the truest words he could find. His hands had stopped trembling sometime after he walked away, but his heart had not. He sat at the table by the window, holding the chipped mug that had become his morning companion, sipping slowly. He kept glancing at his phone, though he had silenced notifications the night before. There were no missed calls. No texts. No knock at the door. The ghost of unanswered things. He dressed in his cleanest shirt, laced up his shoes with slow intention, and grabbed his notebook before stepping into the day. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. Leaves skipped along the sidewalk like forgotten letters, and the wind carried a faint smell of fried onions from the hot dog cart already setting up on the corner. Daniel did not walk toward Rose's. He did not go to the soup kitchen. He walked without thinking, letting the city guide his steps. Every few blocks, he pulled out his phone and checked it again. Still nothing. A cafe without noise. He ended up in a corner cafe near the University District. It was the kind of place students lingered, sipping espresso and studying as though the world might end if they failed their next exam. Daniel chose a table by the window, one that gave him a view of the passing crowd. He ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. Simple. Childhood food. Something that wrapped around your chest and told you that the world was still holding together, even if it felt like it was pulling apart. When it arrived, he wrapped his hands around the bowl and let the steam rise into his face like a prayer. He dipped the sandwich into the soup, bit down, and closed his eyes. It was warm. Rich. Salty. Like comfort. Like being seen just a little. And it made him ache. The voice that changed the air. "Excuse me, sir," someone said from nearby. Daniel looked up. A young man stood by his table, no older than 20, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are you the man from the article? The one who returned the wallet?" Daniel blinked. "I am." The young man reached into his bag and pulled out a plastic container. "I work part-time at the culinary school across the street. We read your story in class. Our instructor said, he said anyone who could give back that much deserves dessert." He placed the container gently on the table. Inside was a single lemon tart, its crust golden, the filling glossy and pale, with a thin line of whipped cream along one edge and a raspberry nestled in the center. Daniel could not speak. The young man smiled. "You are doing more than you know." And then he was gone. The first bite. Daniel stared at the tart for several minutes before picking up his spoon. He cracked the crust gently. Took a bite. The tartness hit first, bright, sharp, immediate. Then came the sweetness. Balanced. Elegant. A reminder that opposites could live in the same space, that a thing could be both strong and tender at once. He ate the rest slowly. Without distraction. Without rush. When he finished, he closed the container, placed it in his bag, and walked out into the afternoon. Still no message from Mia. But his heart felt just a little more open. A call that was not her. That evening, Daniel received a call from the community center. "Daniel," said the familiar voice of the director, "we were wondering if you might speak again. This time for our Thanksgiving gathering. We are inviting families, donors, volunteers. It will not be a formal event. Just food, music, and stories." Daniel hesitated. "Will there be pie?" he asked. The director laughed. "I believe so. Apple, pumpkin, maybe even pecan." Daniel smiled. "Then I will be there." Rosa's truth. The next morning, he visited Rosa's again. She had seen the article in the paper. She had heard about the speech. She had been waiting. "You keep giving pieces of yourself away," she said as she handed him a cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee. "Do not forget to save one for yourself." "I am all right," Daniel said. She sat across from him, setting down her own coffee. "Tell me what you are afraid of." Daniel looked down at the cinnamon roll, still warm in his hand. "That she will not forgive me." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then you love her." "I never stopped." "Then let time do the rest." They sat in silence for a while. Just eating. Just breathing. Together. The knock that did not come. That evening, Daniel returned to the hotel. He took off his shoes. Sat down by the window. Looked out at the city. He checked his phone one more time. Still no call. Still no message. Still no knock. He turned off the light. And let the silence hold him. The plate at the center. He dreamed that night. A table. A long one, with chairs on either side, all empty. At the center sat a single plate. On it, his pie. Warm. Whole. And across the table, a seat pulled out. Not yet filled. But waiting. Part 14, The Extra Plate. Thanksgiving Day arrived dressed in gold and gray. The morning sky was pale and hazy, casting a soft light over the rooftops of Chicago. There was a hush in the air, as if the city itself had paused to remember what it once was, and who it had the power to become again. Daniel Price stood at the window of his hotel room, one hand cradling a mug of coffee, the other resting lightly on the radiator. The heat rose in short bursts, and the scent of steam and bird dust filled the air. It was his first Thanksgiving indoors in years. And yet, he still felt like an outsider. Not because anyone had told him he did not belong, but because some feelings take time to catch up with the facts. Getting dressed. He took his time getting ready. He wore the soft navy shirt Rosa had given him weeks earlier, paired with clean slacks and the same brown shoes he had polished 3 times already this week. He had no cologne, no watch, no tie, but he stood taller than he had in years. Before stepping out the door, he paused. Took one more look in the mirror. Not to adjust anything. Just to make sure he was still there. The community center. By noon, the community center was buzzing. Volunteers moved through the main hall and practiced rhythm, carrying trays, setting tables, arranging centerpieces made of pine cones and dried leaves. Children giggled in corners while their parents chatted quietly near the coffee urns. A long buffet table lined the side of the room, covered in white cloth and crowded with food: roasted turkeys, steaming bowls of mashed potatoes, candied yams, green bean casserole, stuffing, cornbread, cranberry sauce both whole and jellied. And at the end of the line, a dessert table so full it seemed to bow beneath the weight: pies, cakes, cookies, cobblers. Daniel stood in the doorway, hands tucked behind his back. A young volunteer spotted him and waved. "You are Daniel, right?" He nodded. "Your seat is up near the front. Left side. We saved one just for you." The empty seat. The table was long and set for 12. Daniel's name was written on a folded place card, decorated with small hand-drawn pumpkins. He sat, adjusting his chair carefully, and glanced at the card next to his. It was blank. Just a plain, folded square of white paper. He looked up. The director of the center, a tall woman named Gwen, approached with a warm smile. "I asked them to leave one seat open at every table today," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For whom?" "For whoever still needs a place." He nodded slowly. That made sense. But the thought stuck in his mind like a sliver of glass. Serving others first. Before the meal began, Daniel helped serve drinks. He poured water, passed around cups of cider, and carried plates to those who needed help walking or feeding children. He smiled at strangers. Thanked the volunteers. Accepted hugs from people who had only known his name from a headline. By the time he returned to his own table, the food had been served. A full plate waited at his place. Turkey, carved thick and drizzled with gravy. Dressing with sage and dried cranberries. Mashed potatoes with a dollop of butter melting slowly into the center. And cornbread, golden and warm, placed carefully beside a spoonful of bright red cranberry relish. The first bite. He picked up his fork. Took a bite of the turkey. It was moist and perfectly seasoned. Then a forkful of potatoes. Creamy, with just enough salt. He paused after each bite, chewing slowly, breathing deeply, letting the flavors do more than fill his stomach. They reached his soul. The cornbread crumbled gently in his mouth. The cranberry relish was sweet and sharp, a reminder that contrast makes food and life interesting. Across the table, people laughed. Someone clinked a glass. A child passed out folded drawings of turkeys traced from tiny hands. And still, the chair beside Daniel remained empty. A familiar face. He had just reached for the cider when he saw her. Marianne. Standing near the entrance, scanning the room. Her coat was still buttoned. She looked hesitant, like someone arriving late to a wedding she was not sure she had been truly invited to. Their eyes met. She walked toward him. Slowly. And behind her, Mia. 18 now, tall and unmistakably hers. Hair pulled into a bun, glasses sliding down her nose, a canvas bag over her shoulder. She looked around the room, wide-eyed and unsure. Daniel stood before he even realized he had. Marianne stopped a few feet from the table. She said she wanted to come, she said. Mia stepped forward. I read your letter. Daniel swallowed. I meant every word. I know, she said. She looked at the empty chair. Then sat. Without a word. Sharing the plate. Marianne pulled up another chair from a nearby table. A volunteer appeared out of nowhere, placing fresh plates in front of them both. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he passed the butter, the gravy, the bread basket. They served themselves in silence. Then Mia spoke. I remember your pie. Daniel smiled. I burned the crust once. You forgot the salt another time. They both laughed. It was soft, fragile. But it was laughter. They began to eat. Together. The pumpkin pie. When dessert arrived, Mia chose the pumpkin pie. Daniel took apple. They swapped bites across the table. Just one forkful. Just enough. Marianne sat quietly between them, watching with eyes that held too much history to put into words. And for the first time in many, many years, Daniel felt whole. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the past had been erased. But because he was finally sitting at a table that was no longer waiting for him to return. He had arrived. The quiet walk. After the meal, they walked outside together. It had started snowing. Soft flakes fell like grace, covering the sidewalks and trees in pale beauty. Mia slipped her arm through Daniel's. He looked down. She smiled. I missed you. His voice cracked when he replied. I missed myself, too. Part 15, Pancakes and Apologies. The morning after Thanksgiving, Daniel Price stood outside a grocery store holding a small paper bag, the receipt folded neatly into his pocket. It had been years since he had walked through the aisles of a store not just to browse or pass the time, but to shop with purpose. Inside the bag, a dozen eggs, a carton of milk, 2 lemons, baking powder, flour, sugar, and a small bottle of real vanilla extract. The bag was heavier than it should have been, not because of the contents, but because of what he intended to do with them. He was going to make pancakes. A promise remembered. Once, when Mia was 6, Daniel had promised her that every Saturday morning, for as long as she wanted, she would wake up to the smell of pancakes. Not the boxed kind. Not the frozen discs she hated. But real ones. Fluffy, lemon-scented, soft in the center and crisp at the edges. He had kept that promise for almost 2 years. Then the world began to unravel, first his job, then his patience, then his time, and eventually the house where those pancakes were once made. Now, standing in front of the apartment Marianne had invited him to visit whenever you are ready, Daniel reached for something simpler than an apology. A recipe. The door opens. He knocked softly. It was still early, barely 8. A moment passed. Then another. He began to turn away, thinking it was too soon, too much. But then the door opened. Mia stood there, wrapped in a flannel robe, her hair pulled into a lopsided bun. She squinted at him. Are you holding groceries? Yes, Daniel said, lifting the bag slightly. I wanted to make pancakes. She blinked once. Then stepped aside. Kitchen is that way. He entered slowly, the familiar ache of memory pulsing through him. The apartment was small but warm. Books lined the walls. A candle burned softly on the windowsill, the scent of pine faint in the air. Marianne was not home. Mia explained she had gone to visit a neighbor and would return later. I do not remember the recipe exactly, Daniel said, setting the bag on the counter. But I will try. Mia sat at the kitchen table, one leg tucked under the other, watching. You used to whistle when you cooked. I did? Badly. He smiled. I suppose some things do not change. The first batter. He mixed the dry ingredients carefully, measuring with a precision that came from wanting something to be right, not just finished. He whisked in the eggs, the milk, a squeeze of lemon juice, and the vanilla extract. The batter came together slowly, thick and fragrant, with just enough air to promise a tender bite. He let it rest while he heated the pan, wiped the counter, and poured both of them glasses of water. Mia drank hers in small sips. The silence was not heavy, but it was not light either. It was waiting. The sizzle of memory. When the first dollop of batter hit the hot surface, it hissed and spread into a perfect circle. Daniel waited until bubbles formed at the center and the edges began to lift. He flipped it once, clean and smooth. Golden brown. He placed the pancake on a warm plate and slid it across the table to Mia. No syrup yet, he said. Try it first. She raised an eyebrow. Took a bite. Chewed. Then swallowed. Her eyes met his. And she nodded, just once. It tastes the same. Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Pancakes for two. He made a second pancake, then a third. He sat across from her, both of them eating slowly, forks clinking gently against ceramic. Outside the window, the morning sun rose higher, and traffic began to hum in the distance. Halfway through her second pancake, Mia spoke. I used to think you stopped making them because you stopped loving us. Daniel's fork froze in midair. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. But I did stop believing I deserved to be near you. Mia stared at her plate. You disappeared. I broke. That is not the same thing. He nodded. I know that now. A candle and a note. After they finished eating, Daniel stood and began to wash the dishes. Mia dried them. They worked in silence again, but this time it felt like a different kind of quiet. Not waiting. Not doubt. Just being. Before he left, Mia handed him a small candle from the windowsill. It is almost burned out, she said. But it still smells nice. Daniel held it in both hands. Pine and cinnamon and something warm. It is yours. She shrugged. I think it wants to go with you. He slipped it into his coat pocket. On the way out, he saw a folded piece of paper near the door with his name on it. He opened it on the elevator ride down. You can come again. Next time, bring syrup. Mia. The dinner plan. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the soup kitchen. He chopped vegetables. Scrubbed pots. Wiped tables. Then he spoke to Harold. I want to cook something special next week, he said. For the Friday meal. Something that takes time. Harold raised an eyebrow. You asking for permission or volunteers? Both. Harold nodded. I will get you a team. Daniel smiled. The pancake that repaired something. That night, back in his hotel room, Daniel lit the candle Mia had given him. It flickered gently on the windowsill, casting shadows across the room. He sat with a notebook in his lap, Wrote one sentence. She remembered the taste. Then he placed the notebook on the nightstand. And slept. Part 16, The Friday Feast. Friday came with a quiet sense of ceremony. Daniel Price had woken before sunrise, dressed slowly, and packed his notebook into his canvas bag alongside a folded apron and a printed recipe sheet. The air outside was sharp, tinged with early frost, but the sky was clear and full of pale light. He had a destination. He had a plan. And for the first time in years, he had people waiting on something he had created, not a report, not a file, not a redemption story, but a meal. A real one. Something that could be tasted. The soup kitchen, reimagined. By 8 o'clock, the kitchen on 18th Street was already humming with sound, pots clanging, water running, knives tapping against cutting boards in rhythmic precision. Harold, the head cook, barked instructions in his usual rough tone, but even he seemed energized by the change in routine. "This is your kitchen today," he said to Daniel. "Just do not set anything on fire." Daniel smiled, pulled on his apron, and set down his bag. He looked around at the volunteers who had shown up early just to help him, 2 college students from a local social work program, a retired woman named Judith who had baked for the center every Friday for 3 years, and a quiet man named Terrell who had once slept 3 bunks away from Daniel at the winter shelter. They all waited for direction. Daniel held up the recipe sheet. "Today," he said, "we are making something slow. Something rich. Something comforting." He paused. "Beef stew. But not the kind you open from a can and reheat in 2 minutes. The kind that takes 4 hours and 3 conversations to finish." The preparation. The ingredients were already gathered in crates: 24 pounds of chuck roast, 10 pounds of carrots, 6 pounds of potatoes, yellow onions, garlic, rosemary, thyme, tomato paste, red wine, beef stock, and flour for dredging. Daniel set the music low on the radio, soft jazz, slow and gentle. Then they began. The college students diced carrots and onions while laughing about their cooking inexperience. Judith peeled potatoes with surgical focus. Terrell worked beside Daniel at the meat station, slicing roast into cubes and coating them in flour. The kitchen filled with the scent of seared beef, browned deeply in oil until the edges caramelized. The onions followed, then the garlic, the tomato paste, the wine. Daniel stirred carefully, building layers of flavor like layers of trust, slow, intentional, impossible to fake. When the stew began its long simmer, he turned the heat down low and wiped his hands. "It needs time now," he said. "Just like we all did." A visitor bearing pie. Around 11 o'clock, the door opened, and Rosa stepped inside with 2 foil-covered trays in her arms. "I heard someone was making something special," she said, placing the trays on the counter. "Apple pie?" Daniel asked, grinning. "Of course," she said. 2 of them. One with sugar on top, one without. Some people prefer humble pie." The kitchen laughed, and Rosa rolled up her sleeves. "Let me wash up," she said. "I will earn my plate." A meal that was more. By noon, the smell of the stew had drifted beyond the kitchen and into the hall. Guests began to arrive early, drawn by the scent, dozens of them, then more. By 12:30, the line stretched out the door. Daniel stood at the front of the service line with a ladle in hand. He wore a clean apron. He said hello to each person who came through. He met their eyes. He called them by name when he could. "Hot stew, fresh from the pot," he said again and again. "Made with care." Beside him, Terrell added warm rolls to each tray. Judith passed out napkins and sliced Rosa's pie with careful precision. And all around them, the quiet hum of gratitude buzzed softly in the air. People sat in groups, talking. Smiling. No one rushed. No one judged. It was not just a meal. It was belonging. Daniel's bowl. When the last bowl had been served, Daniel finally filled his own. He took a seat at the end of one long table, still wearing his apron, his hands stained slightly with rosemary and stock. He dipped his spoon into the stew. The beef was tender. The carrots soft. The potatoes rich with the flavor of everything around them. He took a bite. Closed his eyes. It was everything he remembered from his childhood and everything he had tried to forget since the fall. A food that said, "You are allowed to feel full again." The quiet across the table. Across from him sat a boy of about 16, eating in silence. He wore 2 jackets, both too large. His sneakers were torn near the toes. Daniel offered a small nod. "Good." The boy nodded once. "You remind me of someone I used to be," Daniel said. The boy looked up. "And someone I still carry." He pulled half a roll from his tray and slid it across the table. The boy took it without a word. Then broke it in 2. Shared it back. The end of the day. After the tables were cleared and the trays washed, after the counters had been scrubbed and the pies stored for tomorrow's guests, Daniel stood alone for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Harold leaned in from the doorway. "You should do this again," he said. Daniel turned. "Next Friday?" "No. I mean, you should do this. Always." Daniel did not reply at first. But his heart swelled at the thought. Feeding people. Feeding dignity. Feeding hope. He removed his apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the hook. A surprise in the bag. That evening, back in his hotel room, Daniel unpacked his bag. At the bottom, tucked beside his notebook, was a napkin. Folded neatly. Written on it, in familiar handwriting. "Your stew reminded me of my grandmother. She raised me. She would have liked you. Thank you for today. Tea." Daniel stared at the note for a long time. Then set it beside Mia's candle on the windowsill. 2 small things. Both warm. Both lit by memory. Part 17, A Recipe to Pass Down. The morning after the Friday stew, Daniel Price stood at the soup kitchen sink with sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a large stock pot that had soaked overnight. Steam rose around his hands, and the scent of rosemary and onion still lingered in the air. His shoulders ached, and his knuckles were red and raw. But his heart was light. He had cooked something real. He had shared it. And more than anything, people had stayed to finish it. That was the quiet miracle. Not the number served, but the silence between spoonfuls, the kind that meant people were not just eating because they were hungry. They were eating because they felt welcome. A visitor with an idea. At the back of the kitchen, Gwen, the director of the community center, leaned against the doorway, sipping a paper cup of coffee. "You do not know how many people asked me for your recipe yesterday," she said. Daniel turned from the sink, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "I thought they were just being polite." "They were being moved," Gwen replied. "It reminded them of home." She stepped closer. "I was thinking, what if you taught it?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Taught it?" "We have a little classroom off the side of the center," she explained. "We use it for crafts, parenting groups, resume help. Nothing formal. But the stove works, and there is a counter." "You want me to teach cooking?" "I want you to teach connection," she said. "But food is a good place to start." A memory unfolds. Daniel sat down later that afternoon with his notebook and stared at a blank page. He had never taught anything before. He had never stood in front of a group with the expectation that what he knew mattered. But he began slowly. First, he wrote the recipe for the beef stew. Then, beside each step, he added a note. Not about the food, but about the moment. Brown the meat. This is not about rushing. Let it color. Let it deepen. Add wine. If you do not have wine, use more broth. If you do not have broth, use water and faith. Simmer. Sometimes the best things happen when you stop touching them. It took him 2 hours to finish. When he did, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Prepared. The first class. The following Wednesday, the community center opened its side room to a group of 12 people. They came from different walks of life. A single father with twin daughters. An older woman named Clara who had lost her sight but never her touch. A teenage boy who had just started at the transitional youth shelter. 2 middle-aged men who had lived through layoffs and now found themselves with time but no direction. Daniel stood in front of them wearing a clean apron and holding a printed copy of the recipe. There were no microphones. No lights. Just pots, pans, vegetables, and people who had shown up to learn. Cooking together. They began slowly. Chopping. Peeling. Washing. Daniel walked them through every motion, not with authority, but with gentleness. Cut with respect for the blade, he said. It is not the tool's job to make the meal. It is yours. He showed them how to sear meat without fear. How to listen to onions as they softened. How to tell when garlic had turned fragrant and when it had turned bitter. And all the while, he wove stories into the spaces between the steps. How food had once been a language he had forgotten. How peeling carrots beside strangers had brought him back. How one bowl, shared in silence, had meant more than 1,000 words. A shared table. They ate at a long folding table set with mismatched napkins and dollar store cutlery. There was no centerpiece, no music. Just people. And a large pot of stew. Each person filled their bowl. Each person passed the bread. And for 45 minutes, there were no phones, no announcements, no planning. Only eating. And peace. A letter from Mia. That night, after cleaning up the kitchen and walking home beneath a sky full of slow-moving clouds, Daniel found an envelope slid under his hotel door. His name was written on it in familiar handwriting. Inside, a folded piece of notebook paper. Dad. Mom told me you are teaching a cooking class. I think that is kind of amazing. I know we are still figuring things out. But I thought you might want this. It is my version of the pancake recipe. I have been making it for friends in my dorm. They say it tastes like real life. I tell them that is because it comes from you. Maybe you can use it in one of your classes. Love. Mia. Daniel read the note twice. Then unfolded the attached page. Her handwriting was neater than his. But the ingredients were the same. Flour. Eggs. Milk. Lemon zest. A splash of vanilla. And at the bottom. Let it rest before cooking. Everything needs time to rise. Pancakes for everyone. The next week, Daniel opened his second class with a surprise. He brought Mia's recipe. This one comes from someone very important to me, he told the group. It is simple. But simple does not mean easy. It just means honest. They mixed the batter. They waited the full 10 minutes. And when they poured it onto the hot griddle, the smell of lemon and vanilla filled the room. The pancakes came out fluffy and golden, soft on the inside with crispy edges. They ate them in silence, then laughter, then seconds. No one asked for syrup. They did not need it. Part 18, The Potluck and the Podium. Daniel Price sat at the bus stop with a notebook balanced on one knee, watching early morning light stretch across the concrete. Wind tugged at his coat, and the scent of frost clung to the air like memory. He was not heading to the soup kitchen today. nor to the community center. He was on his way to a high school. The email had arrived 3 days ago. Mr. Price. My students read the article about your story. They followed your cooking classes and even tried to recreate your stew. Would you be willing to come speak to our senior class during our monthly Voices of the City assembly? Sincerely, Amanda Whitlock, English teacher, Easton High. At first, Daniel had almost ignored it. He had stood in soup kitchens and classrooms. But a high school auditorium? Full of skeptical teenagers? That was something else entirely. Still, he had said yes. Because lately, saying yes had led to things worth remembering. The arrival. Easton High was a red brick building with tall windows and the weary charm of a place that had seen too much and endured anyway. Daniel walked through the double doors, was signed in by a polite receptionist, and waited near a bulletin board pinned with posters, holiday coat drives, poetry readings, college prep nights. A tall woman with glasses approached him with a warm smile and a firm handshake. You must be Mr. Price, she said. Amanda Whitlock, he replied. She smiled. I appreciate you coming. They walked through the halls, students sliding past them like waves in a tide, laughing, grumbling, texting. Daniel felt the edges of nerves crawl up his arms. You are just speaking for 20 minutes, Amanda said as they reached the auditorium doors. Then we have a surprise for you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You will see. The speech. He stood on stage with a single spotlight warming his face, the crowd of students barely visible beyond its reach. He told them the story. Not the newspaper version. The real one. Of working hard. Of losing everything. Of the weight of cold nights in silence. Of finding a wallet. And giving it back. He did not raise his voice. He did not pace or gesture wildly. He just spoke. And the room listened. Not because he asked it to. But because the truth does not need permission to be heard. The potluck tables. When the talk ended, Amanda returned to the stage. Now, she said, as a thank you to Mr. Price, and because we believe that food tells stories better than words ever can, our culinary students have prepared something special. Curtains slid open to reveal 3 long tables, covered in checkered cloths and lined with silver trays and slow cookers. Amanda guided Daniel down from the stage as applause faded into the excited rustling of chairs and chatter. The students made recipes inspired by your story, she said. He blinked. One table offered beef stew with crusty bread. Another had pancakes dusted with lemon zest. A third had a version of Rosa's apple pie, small hand pies, folded neatly in wax paper. Daniel walked the table slowly, overwhelmed by the scent, by the effort. They cooked all this? Every bit. The first bite. He sat at a table near the back of the room with a bowl of stew, a pancake folded like a taco, and an apple hand pie balanced beside his cup of cider. The stew was hot and rich. He could taste the hours they had spent, the way they had leaned into the instructions. The meat was tender, the carrots still holding their shape. Someone had even added rosemary. The pancake was bright, fluffy, soft at the edges. He closed his eyes as the lemon hit his tongue. He opened the hand pie last. Bit into it. And for a moment, he could feel Rosa's flour-dusted fingers in the folds of the crust, even though someone else had made it. The student who stayed. As the crowd thinned, one student stayed behind, holding a notebook, hesitating near the edge of Daniel's table. Daniel looked up and smiled. Want to sit? The student nodded, sliding into the seat. My name is Jonah, he said. I made the stew. I mean, not alone. But I helped a lot. Daniel nodded. It was good. I have been thinking, Jonah said, glancing down at his notebook. I am not very good at writing essays. But I like cooking. I thought maybe, if I cannot tell my story with words, I could tell it with food. Daniel leaned forward. You absolutely can. Jonah smiled, then grew serious. My dad left last year. He was not like you. He did not try to come back. Daniel paused. I am sorry. Jonah nodded. It is not your fault. Daniel hesitated. But sometimes, he said gently, when you feed people, you find pieces of them in the way you season things. In how long you let something simmer. In what you serve first. Jonah wrote that down. Word for word. The note in the jacket. Later that evening, after Daniel returned to the hotel, he removed his coat and felt something crinkle in the inside pocket. A folded napkin. Not his. He opened it. Written in blocky handwriting. I liked your quiet. It made me listen harder. J. He placed the napkin beside the others on the windowsill, now crowded with paper reminders of small miracles. He lit me his candle again. Its light flickered gently against the glass. A dinner alone, but not lonely. That night, Daniel walked to a small diner near the park. He ordered roasted chicken with potatoes and green beans. It was a meal he had not had in years. The kind that used to show up on his table without effort, back when effort still seemed optional. The chicken was crisped at the skin and tender inside. The potatoes were buttery and smooth. The green beans had garlic. It was simple. And good. And enough. He took his time. Ate every bite. Then, before leaving, he wrote something on a napkin and left it beneath his plate. Thank you for cooking like someone still believes in good endings. Part 19, Bitter Coffee, Sweet Resolve. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon when Daniel Price heard a name he had not spoken aloud in over a decade. He had been sitting near the back of Rosa's bakery, sipping tea and reviewing ideas for the next community class, this one focused on low-cost winter meals, something hearty and flexible. Potato leek soup, perhaps. Cabbage with white beans and garlic. Cornbread with roasted onions. The bell above the door chimed, and Rosa's soft voice lifted toward the front. Afternoon, sir. What can I get for you? The voice that answered was deeper than Daniel remembered, but the sharp edge had not changed. I will take a black coffee. Large. No cream. No sugar. Daniel's fingers froze on the page. He looked up slowly. And saw Mark Ellison. The man who had fired him. The man who had called him a risk during layoffs. The man who had once, without hesitation, helped dismantle the stable life Daniel had built, and never once looked back. Daniel's first instinct was to leave. He could have slipped out the back. But something rooted him to the chair. This was not a day for running. The weight of recognition. Mark turned from the counter, cup in hand, and scanned the cafe for an empty seat. His eyes landed on Daniel. And froze. It took a second. Then two. Recognition settled behind his eyes like fog clearing from glass. Daniel, he said, half question, half disbelief. Daniel nodded once. Hello, Mark. Mark stood still. Then walked over slowly, hesitating by the chair across from him. Mind if I sit? Daniel gestured toward the seat. Go ahead. The unspoken years. Mark sat down, his cup still steaming. He looked thinner than Daniel remembered. His hair was mostly gray now, his tie slightly askew. But the confidence had not vanished, only been subdued by time. You look good, Mark said. Daniel gave a neutral smile. I feel steady. There was a pause. Mark cleared his throat. I read the article. The one in the Gazette. Did not expect to see your name there. Daniel nodded. It was not expected. By me either. I heard you are doing talks now. Cooking classes. I am trying to build something from what is left, Daniel said quietly. Mark took a long sip of his coffee. I owe you an apology. The burn. Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then leaned forward. You do not owe me an apology for firing me. The plant closed. I was not special. A lot of people lost their jobs. Mark looked down at his coffee. I was harsh. And I made sure they chose you first. You had been late a few times. You had a daughter. I thought it made you weaker. Daniel let the words hang in the air. He did not fill the silence. He wanted Mark to feel it. Mark continued, voice lower. The truth is, I saw something breaking in you. And instead of helping, I made sure you fell. The slice of something real. Rosa approached the table with her usual grace, setting down a small plate between them. Almond tart, she said gently. Fresh. On the house. You both look like you need something warm. Daniel blinked. Thank you. Rosa nodded and walked away. The tart was delicate, thin crust, almond paste filling, topped with sliced almonds and a brush of apricot glaze. Mark looked down at it, then up again. You still have your dignity, he said. I envied that. Daniel took the fork. Cut the tart in half. Passed a piece across the plate to Mark. You cannot rebuild dignity. You carry it. Even when it hurts. They ate in silence for a while. The tart was buttery, slightly sweet, with a chewiness that made each bite linger. It was not forgiveness. But it was human. A message from the past. Before Mark stood to leave, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. This is from your old locker, he said. The factory sold the land last month. One of the demolition guys found a few boxes in storage. I asked them to send me yours. Daniel took the envelope. It was old, sealed with clear tape that had yellowed. Inside was a single photo. Daniel holding Mia on his shoulders, both of them laughing. She was no older than 5. A plastic butterfly clip held her hair in a crooked ponytail. He had forgotten that photo existed. Forgotten that joy. Coffee with meaning. After Mark left, Daniel sat for a long time at the corner table, photo in hand. He ordered another cup of tea. Then changed his mind. Rosa, he called softly. She looked up. Black coffee, please. She brought it in her favorite mug, a deep blue one with a chip on the rim. Daniel sipped it without sugar. Without milk. Bitter. Hot. And strangely alive. He folded the photo gently, slid it into his notebook, and looked out the window. The street was the same. But he was not. A dinner by candlelight. That evening, Daniel did not go out. He stayed in the hotel and prepared a small dinner using the shared kitchen down the hall, a rare moment of quiet where he could cook just for himself. He made lentils with carrots and garlic, simmered them in broth, added cumin and a squeeze of lemon. He toasted a slice of sourdough and drizzled it with olive oil. When it was done, he carried the plate back to his room, lit the candle Mia had given him, and sat by the window. The lentils were soft and earthy. The garlic warm and mellow. He chewed slowly. Thoughtfully. The tart from earlier still lingered on his tongue, almond and apricot and something unresolved. But he felt lighter. Not because the past had vanished. But because he had faced it without flinching. And still shared the plate. Part 20, The Kitchen Light. On a Sunday morning layered with soft clouds and pale sunlight, Daniel Price stood on the doorstep of a familiar apartment. He held nothing in his hands. No paper bag of groceries. No handwritten recipe. No pie. Only himself. For the first time since he had left that home, years ago, he was arriving not to offer, not to explain, not to apologize, but simply to be there. Mia had sent the message a few days before. "Would you come over for dinner? I want to cook." Just that. 7 words. But it had taken him almost an hour to respond. Now, as he raised his hand to knock, he caught his reflection in the window, a man older than he expected, softer around the eyes, straighter in the spine. He knocked twice. The door opened. Mia stood there, apron tied over a faded university sweatshirt, hair braided back, eyes bright. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied. The smell of thyme. The scent that drifted from the kitchen was sweet and earthy, roasted squash, butter, garlic, and something deeper. Something braised. Daniel stepped inside, removed his shoes, and followed her into the kitchen. It was small but full of life. The counter was cluttered with bowls and cutting boards, a Dutch oven on the stovetop, steam rising gently from its lid. Marianne was not home. "She's spending the weekend with her sister," Mia said, stirring something in a pot. "So we have the place." Daniel nodded. "It smells incredible. I hope it tastes better than the first time I tried this." "I nearly set the kitchen on fire," she said with a grin. "What are you making?" "Short ribs," she said. "With parsnip puree and roasted squash. I found a recipe in a book and spent all week trying to make it mine." Daniel laughed softly. "That is how cooking works." "Also," she added, "I made pancakes. For dessert." He blinked. "Pancakes? For dessert?" She shrugged. "Tradition matters." The table. Mia had set the table before he arrived. 2 plates. 2 glasses of water. A cloth napkin folded in a triangle, just like Rosa used to do at the bakery. Daniel sat slowly. His chest felt tight, but not in a way that hurt. It was full. He watched as Mia plated the food, her hands steady, her face focused. She carried both dishes to the table, set his down gently, then sat across from him. The short ribs were glistening with glaze. The parsnip puree was smooth and pale. The squash had curled slightly at the edges, caramelized in places. Daniel looked at her. Mia picked up her fork. "Well," she said, "eat it while it's hot." The first bite. He took a bite of the ribs. They were tender, rich, slightly tangy with something sweet underneath, maybe pomegranate molasses or balsamic vinegar. The puree was earthy and smooth, like a whisper of childhood mashed potatoes wrapped in silk. The squash was his favorite. He chewed slowly. Put down his fork. "It is perfect," he said. Mia smiled. "Do not say that unless you mean it." He met her eyes. "I do." She took a bite of her own, and they ate in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. It was earned. The question that changed everything. Halfway through the meal, Mia looked up and said, "Do you want to come next week?" Daniel paused. "For what?" "We are having some friends over. Nothing big. Just a meal. I thought maybe you could help cook. Or just be here." His throat tightened. He set down his fork. "I would like that." She nodded. Then, as if unsure whether to add more, she looked down at her plate. "But you do not have to say yes every time." Daniel smiled gently. "I have spent years saying no to things I wanted. I think it is time to say yes." The pancake dessert. After the plates were cleared, Mia brought out the dessert. Pancakes. Small, round, served warm with whipped cream and a drizzle of lemon syrup. She placed a stack of 3 on his plate, the top one slightly off-center. "They are not pretty," she said. "They are beautiful," he replied. He took a bite. The lemon hit first, then the softness of the pancake, the cool cream settling over the warmth. He closed his eyes. "I remember this," he said. "Your version was better." "No," he said softly. "Yours is perfect." A walk home. After the meal, Mia offered him the last of the whipped cream and a cup to take for the walk. They stood in the doorway together, the evening light softening the world outside. She hugged him. He froze for a moment. Then held her back. Fully. Completely. No hesitation. "You did not have to come back," she said against his shoulder. "I never left," he replied. The final light. Back in his room, Daniel placed the empty whipped cream cup beside the now burned-down candle from Mia. He did not light a new one. He simply sat. Notebook in hand. He turned to the last page. Wrote, "Tonight, I was fed. Not just by food, but by memory. And hope. And the hands of someone I once feared I had lost. She made dinner. I brought nothing. And still, I was full." He closed the notebook. Turned off the light. And finally, slept without dreaming. Because life at last was enough.